hey, we're all authors, man. You're writing a book, whether you want to or not, and whether you publish is almost irrelevant. But today's a page in your book, and it's either a page you keep because you're proud of it, or a page you tear out and burn because you didn't pay attention to the things that mattered most, and you let the world tell you what to do versus what your heart and your spirit led you to do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Moeller, and on this podcast, we will be interviewing guests that have made their mark in real estate, in business, and in other areas of life. Listening to podcasts myself has helped me in so many different ways and continues to do so. If you're a real estate investor or an entrepreneur, or aspiring to be either, or just someone that wants to learn, you've come to the right place. An easy way to have an impact is to share this episode with friends or family, provide a review, or just spread the word. We greatly appreciate it, and now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. Very excited for this week's guest, Rick Hale. Rick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks, Phil.
For those listeners, Rick is in his home with a beautiful setting in the background. I see a bunch of woods. It looks like he's on a mountain, a guitar in the background. It looks like you're living your best life, man.
Yeah, no reason to complain on my end, but it's, we're going to talk about this as we get into it, but it's by design, not default.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to get into it. Before we do, I got to talk about Rick a little bit because this guy, impressive. So broker and owner of 6 different Keller Williams realty offices. So very successful in the real estate space. He loves to teach and coach agents, as his bio says, but honestly, he loves to teach and coach. I know that from just my discussions with him, not about just business, but life and balance and quality of life. I love that. He is a guitarist. He has his own band. I mentioned the guitar in the background, and he recently wrote a book called Stop Settling, which I have a copy here signed by Rick himself. Very much appreciated, nuggets throughout, and we're going to talk about it some. But I want to start with why. What led to this book? Why did you write a book, Rick?
Well, so it probably goes all the way back to I had an educator once tell me, ask a class. We were in a class in Austin, Texas, where Keller Williams is based. And Dick Dillingham said, hey, how many of you are cool? And, I reflected back in that moment. He gave us a second to decide before we raised our hand. And of course, everyone thought of the COOL version of cool. And I thought, well, I was in a band once and, had long hair till I was 30, back when long hair was cooler than it is maybe now. I mean, if you're Phil sporting the best look in town and save on all those grooming products. And I kind of sheepishly kind of went, I don't know, maybe. I didn't want to be, I'm humble by nature, but he said, no, KOOL, a keen observer of life. And he planted a seed. And it's funny how people during your lifetime will plant seeds, and either you fertilize and water and and help them grow, or you just walk over them or on them and just kind of let it go, and they die, their own natural death. And this seed mattered, and there's a few seeds in everyone's life that matter. And that seed, it stands for keen observer of life. That's his version of cool, is with a K. And I don't know, it just landed. I'm like, I'm going to pay attention. And this is 30 years ago, Phil. And I'm going to start kind of every now and then if I journaling or write something, so that I don't lose these thoughts. And so that didn't directly lead to the book, but it led to a mindset shift around how I find things amusing and interesting and educational or inspirational. And sometimes, it's not always what to do, what not to do, but in the grand scheme of writing a book, I knew I had a cool story as a kid. I went to 10 schools in 12 years. I spent a year in Venezuela when I was 15 and a half, 16, and changed my life forever. I spent a year in military school and a boarding school when I was 12. And I lived with different versions of family. I was bounced around a lot through divorces and just life change. And I just knew it was an interesting story that might be worth telling one day, because what I do know is when I talk to my dad, who's just turned 80, all of a sudden mortality starts to be the real conversation, and around, health and, flexibility and inflammation and things that you don't think about when you're younger, that if you don't plan for, will sneak up on you. And just the thought of, being a distant memory one day. And I thought, man, that's kind of a sobering thought. So I started asking questions, knowing more, more aware now that his time it's finite, and that he's not going to be here to tell stories. And he came from Europe, and fascinating stories. I didn't know much about my great granddad or my great great granddad. In fact, nothing. I can't tell you anything anyway. I decided not to be that guy. And I wanted to start a new ritual in our family where you document a life well lived. And I think when you live a life with the purpose of one day writing a book or leaving a legacy letter or even a journal, you see things, that cool acronym comes to mind. But also, I think you live differently because you trigger your subconscious brain to find different things than it naturally or organically seek out. And so the brain's a riddle solver. And so the riddle I planted 10 years ago is, what would it look like to one day have a life worthy of leaving a document for my kids' so that I won't be forgotten, because we're all going to be forgotten on some level if you don't leave some mark. And you can say you do it in the lives of your kids and then they transcend. And I agree, there's a ripple effect. But I'm pretty sure 4 generations from now, the stories that resonated in a life well lived that you wish your great great grandfather left behind are probably, they're just not the same story, or they don't exist.
Man. And I was at a conference one time and they talked about the question was how many times, so I'm fortunate to live close to my parents, so we get to spend a fair amount of time with them. But how many more in-depth quality discussions do you have with the parents? If they're 70 and they might live to 85, is that 15 more quality discussions because you did it one time a year? And all of a sudden, once you start to think about that, it becomes much more finite. So the fact that you're intentional about having those discussions, one, and documenting and writing them down, and then also forecasting that for you with your kids, I think is so cool. But I want to go back,
Thank you.
Rick, a little bit to, I think two things to me stood out in your book on stories. You talk about Venezuela. I want to come back to that and why that was so impactful. But I want to ask first, there was a boy drowning. I forget where that was. And you were a big part of saving someone's life early. And I think there was a bit of a shift in your mindset, in your belief, I think from your grandmother, maybe, or
It
if I
was,
if I
yeah.
mix it up. So tell me a little bit about that story and how that impacted you.
It was, and so I'm passionate about helping young people, and the reason I'm passionate about it is in my life there were a few people that stepped up, or in a moment that stood out, kind of that, again, a seed's planted and someone else germinated it and watered it and made it grow, and I just bought in and believed in. And so one of those moments, we all have those moments, and mine at 10 years old, my parents were just divorced, and I think I was probably in my, gosh, 10 years old, so I would have been like third grade, fourth grade maybe. But I went to visit my grandparents who lived in Venezuela, and my mom had moved there after that previous divorce, and I hadn't seen her in a while. And long story short, we went to this hot springs in the middle of the country, and I'd never been out of the country at that point, and it was a complete world of foreign energy, and literal and figuratively. But we were at this hot springs. My grandmother actually lost her leg in the war, escaping communism in a train station
Wow.
in Munich. The Allied bombers, it was us, came in, and the way to win a war is to take out, the transportation hubs and the access to moving people and machinery around. And so they were trying to get from Munich to whatever the next city is closer to freedom. And when the bomb struck, they were running out of the train station and underneath trains. It was the quickest way to get away as opposed to going around, because there were apparently lines and lines and rows of trains. And one of them shook when a bomb hit, and it rolled over my grandmother's leg right at the
Wow.
knee. Ridiculous story. And it's in the book. So I'll stop there to say my granddad walked 6 miles, broke into a veterinarian clinic, somehow cauterized it, and saved her life. And so the reason we were at this hot springs is she had chronic arthritic pain and some other things that went with just that unfortunate catastrophe. And so she was taking a nap. My granddad was gone somewhere, and they gave me, a Bolivar, which was their currency, and said, go down and get, grape soda and go hang at the pool, which was really a hot pool. And I'm by myself. There's 2 adults sitting there, and these 4 kids run out of the woods and into the pool. One, two, three, four dive into the pool, one after another. 3 came up, one didn't. And the one that didn't, I quickly realized, even at 10 years old, that there's something going, it's wrong. And he's bouncing up a little bit, gurgling, gargling, and then going back under. I looked at there were 2 adults at the pool at the same time with an infant. And I looked at them like, you're going to save the day, right? Like, you see this, right? And the adult man ran to the edge of the pool, Phil, and he froze like the Batman freeze. Remember the old
Yeah.
Batman? Literally just stopped. And I'm half chewing on a cracker or something. I'm like, this is not good. So without really thinking, I jumped in, and I had no training. And the kid almost drowned me because you don't, the one thing you don't do, swim under. And I lifted his legs thinking that if he had air, he'll do better. You know, that's good logic. But I didn't accommodate for myself, and he almost drowned me in the process, pulled a lot of hair out, you know, in a panic. And I got him to the side of the pool. And the point of the story isn't that I saved a kid's life, is that at 10 years old, I felt incredibly unlovable. I felt disconnected. My family, I'd already a couple of divorces, and just didn't, I just felt displaced in life. And I'm in a foreign country hanging out with my mom, knowing she's not coming back, and some uncertainty where I was back in the States. But I went back and told my grandmother the story. And at first I told my granddad, who was not a particularly loving, kind person, and he just dismissed it and said whatever and left. My grandmother kind of overheard it, walked over, and she put both hands on my cheeks and stared me, you know, eye to eye, not even 6 inches away, and said, "You're a gift of God. You're special, and He has big plans for you." And every
Wow.
time I tell that story, I get choked up right there, because that was the seed that mattered. It All of a sudden I realized, I mean, I don't think I logically connected the dots, Phil, but I can't control the uncontrollables. And there is a powerful force bigger than me that'll always keep me safe. And so it was a pretty big moment. It was an affirmation that every kid needs, that they're worthy and that they're capable and that they're good. And I think it was just a seed planted, honestly, being a spiritual person by God, that to show me that I had potential to do good things.
And I, first of all, that story is amazing. And I'll go back even farther. Your grandma, your grandmother was probably a foot or less from death, right? On the
Yeah,
train. Your
no doubt.
grandfather went
No
six
doubt.
miles to save her. And look where we are today. We're writing a book impacting thousands of lives. And
Yeah,
just the last 100 years of not coincidence is
not
really,
quite.
really neat. So tell
Thank you.
me, first, just thanks for sharing that story. Tell
Of
me more broadly, Venezuela and the culture, the politics, whatever it was there that was also impactful to you.
So when I was 10, it was just a summer visit. And it was at that summer visit that the call came in from my some adopted and step family. And long story short, I just had a lot of energy, you know, and I'm sure I had ADD and HDH, all the letters that imply a lot of energy. I was a good kid, but I was just over the top, always buzzing with energy, and probably difficult in that I just needed a lot of attention, and maybe I was starved for, you know, attention, and that's how I created an environment where I got attention. But long story short, they decided that I should go to military school, and that would kind of straighten me out. So the next year, I ended up shortly thereafter, anyway, going to military school. And from there, the train ride got really interesting. And I'll, again, it's in the book, but I ended up living with an international businessman who was setting up offshore corporations to shelter tax money. And so I spent 2 years in Massachusetts with a guy that was going to marry my mom that didn't. And my mom never came back, even though I thought she would. She ended up staying in Venezuela, marrying a Venezuelan. So I lived with him for 2 years. Unfortunately, his choice in vocation landed him a 5 year run in Atlanta Penitentiary and some other prisons in our great country for corporate crime. And ended up back at my grandparents, who had now moved to Athens, Georgia from Venezuela. But somewhere in the middle of my 10th grade year, my granddad decided that he was ready to allow me to release me to the universe to go explore again, and sent me back to Venezuela where my mom lived. Meanwhile, in the middle of the Andes Mountains, and when I tell you middle of the Andes Mountains, I mean the middle of nothing. So when you say what was the political environment, I have no idea. I'm a 16-year-old who's hoping to get his driver's license, who's now going to spend some time with his mother. First time since I was 10 or 11, because I saw her a little bit here and there, like a visit, but really I didn't know my mom. And so after, I don't know, 3 months of sitting in this village we were up on this hill overlooking a three-street village. The street lights, Phil, weren't real street lights. They were like strung Christmas lights. And most of the roads were gravel and dirt. They weren't even paved. I will say it was scenically ridiculously beautiful. I mean, it was one of the prettier places I've been. But as a 16-year-old, you're not really looking for solitude and scenery.
Right.
So I'll cut to the chase on Venezuela, because I spent a whole year there. So I pretty awesome, eye-opening experience. But the experience inside of it that was most dramatic was a missionary came to our village, and my mom, in talking to him, his name was Johnny. I don't know how it came about, but he offered to take me with him, and he drove this big box truck that had been converted into a mini camper. It had two
Okay.
little bunk beds and a projection system, and he cut the sides of this big box truck open so that it would flip open kind of, and the screen would hang, and he would go village town to village town. And I mean, he wasn't in the city. We weren't in Caracas or any of the big cities. We would go along the Colombian border and the poorest of the poor towns with, zero paved streets and sometimes electricity. And so, long story short, there, my mom suggested I go with him for 6 weeks. Actually, she didn't say 6 weeks. She just said, "Do you want to go on a trip?" And I was thinking a few days. And anyway, she left out a few key details when I'm like, I think my thought at 16 was, "Mom, anything but here. Like, I'm so bored. I want to kill myself."
Yeah.
So I jumped in this truck, dude. First thing I said was, "Where are we going?" And he looks over, and, and his incredibly fluent Spanish self said, "That's what I heard." And I'm like, "Oh, that's great. What does that mean?" And I quickly realized he didn't speak English, and I spoke almost no Spanish. I mean, I knew bathroom and restaurant and beer, cerveza.
Yeah.
So I was in trouble. But again, I think the spiritual world, the higher powers, or whatever guides you, I think you're given opportunities to either grow or stay. And I took the opportunity, and it was a heck of an eye opener, because I realized my absolute worst day is probably someone's best day somewhere. And I saw
Yeah.
what poverty really looked like, and it was scorching hot. And they were, border patrol checking us every 5 miles with submachine guns and mirrors under the truck. And he's
Wow.
trying to explain why he has a non-Spanish speaking kid with him. And, realize this is like in 19, I would have been 16. So 81, 82. This is a long time ago.
Hmm.
But when we got to a village, if someone, a lot of the food we ate was given to us by some member of the church, and it would be cooked in an open fire in a big vat or pot, and they would do these arepas. They would make these. It was like a starch based thing that you'd eat with it, like a bread. And I grew to really appreciate anything that tasted good, and I grew to appreciate anybody that was kind and loving, especially if they had a house with a hammock and a fan. Like, that was the night at the Ritz, because
Wow.
that truck was awful to sleep in. And, I came back, when I came back to the United States, when I got back to the village we were living in, I quickly realized it was time for me to go home and figure it out. And, when I got back to the States, Phil, there's the story of immigrants who want to kiss the ground. I'd have eaten a bowl of dirt, man. Give me some US dirt. I will eat it. Put some water in it. Great. Helps it go down. But
The amount of perspective.
my appreciation for who I am, what I am, and my capacity as an American citizen, I was enlightened. We'll leave it at
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's amazing. And I think a couple takeaways for me is one, I kind of said it, but the perspective you gained about what we have here, what you have now, the opportunity, but also you faced a lot of obstacles. Your family faced a lot of obstacles. And I think how you frame those obstacles in the moment is really important, but you probably didn't have that perspective at the time. But also, trust that those obstacles are probably there for a reason, and time will help you reframe them to what they were there for, even though in the moment you don't know what they're there for. And I guess that's what stands out to me is you have that perspective of the experience in time now that you didn't have them, but you've leveraged that to have an impact.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I wrote the book too was a legacy letter to my kids, like I said, but kind of a roadmap too to processing and assigning proper value. And when is a weed not a weed came to me this week. We talked about that. I shot a 2 minute wisdom, clip. And it's when you decide that's not a weed anymore. That's a beautiful flowering plant, or any version of a plant. And I'm keeping it. I didn't have to pay for it, but it was a gift from somebody, from nature. And so it's kind of like that lemonade, from lemons, and realization that this is a temporary setback. It's not permanent. It's only permanent if I assign permanence and choose not to change my course.
Yep.
And so you're right. Subtle seeds planted may not show up until later, and you don't know what that moment meant. But I think there's this universal journey we're all on, where those things are still there planted. You just have to go back and recognize and assign value that's positive and productive.
Well, so I want to, I mean, first of all, two amazing stories. And I just wanted to, I had read those and there's a lot more detail in the book about the stories and just an unbelievable childhood. So just get the book to learn that. But then there's so much more content and systems and structures on how to go about building a life of a regret-free life. But I want to, who, you said your kids and like legacy, but stop settling. Who's settling?
Well, I think we all settle to some degree, and we do something. It's funny, as you mentioned earlier, I have coached and trained a lot of people. Our organization had 1,500 agents and 60 staff members, and constantly called into. And what I've learned about the human condition is that we don't wholesale quit. If you're considering, if you look in the mirror and you're like, "Hey, I'm a successful guy or gal. I've got some things figured out." But my question's always, okay, so what's the ultimate best? What does your real potential speak to? And I think little things are big things in the grand scheme. And the subplot is how to build a regret-free life. And I think the regrets are things you leave behind or don't pay attention to. And so for me, I figured out a couple things quick. One, annual goals are great. And I think, if you can break those down into daily, the wars won daily is a mantra I lived in like the more you can accomplish in a day, you only have to have a few perfect days to have a perfect week, to have a perfect month. But if you try to have a perfect month, you're going to blow through a few days, probably inefficient or ineffective or ineffective. And so reverse engineering a year is great, but what I learned too is that people set these big annual goals and tend to kind of come up short often because they're big goals and they take more time than a year will allow. And then they give up. They hold, there's some vulnerability and uncertainty that shows up then, and they basically abandon that goal or they rewrite it for the next year only to feel failure again. And one of the lessons I learned is some goals take longer. They take, we live in a microwave, sort of in, if you will, climate where everybody expects instantaneous feedback. And some of the bigger goals, you said, hey, you have 6 offices. I actually have an investment in almost 15 offices, but that wouldn't have happened if I didn't come from contribution, find ways to help other people who then wanted to reciprocate, with opportunity. And so none of that happened in a year, but on a 5-year scheme. And I created this operational strategy to help you chart and map out what would life look like in 5 years. And then, back to you made the point earlier, I'm all about holistic happiness. I've had money and I've not had money. I've lost big money in chunks with bad investments. And, so what, now what? I have some cool affirmations, but I will say having money is easier than not having money. But I've also will say that having more money doesn't actually lead, and you've all heard it, wealth alone doesn't create happiness. And so I took Zig Ziglar's 7-spoke wheel and I created a 12-spoke wheel that I think if you pay attention to these are like dials on the dashboard of a car. And, your car, the engine may be working great and the electronics may be working great, but if you get a hole in the radiator, everything comes to a grinding halt. And I think inside of those 12 areas of life, you may be crushing it. The engine may be your financial world. Something may be relationally sound, but if all of a sudden health is neglected for a season and you lose traction, some things you get back, some things you don't. And so the whole regret piece of it is paying attention to all of the dials and gauges on the human life, dashboard.
And I think so. I have it here too. Mine. So Rick showed his very nice version. I have my scribbled version from the book, and it's in the book. But there's just to picture it. Uh, in the center, there's the hub, if you will, that says life, and then there's about 12 or so spokes: relationships, romance, spiritual, charity, adventure, hobbies, travel, finance, career, education, health. A lot of different things. And just to frame that up in Rick's point to it. So Rick, there's all kinds of there's different frameworks within the book, but I want to talk about one thing. You talk in the book about positive and negative questions and reticular activator. And I hear you say that word, maybe more than anyone I talk to, I hear you say that. So what is that? How does our mind work? And how do we leverage the understanding of that to change things?
So your subconscious brain has this is my research, my opinion, and my position, and it's played out well. And your brain's really designed to, one, keep you alive and safe, to force you to think of things that prevent you from walking into traffic or forgetting to eat or going to the restroom, things that are vital. And then when it's done keeping you alive, it's kind of like some version of Maslow's hierarchy. But the next level is to solve riddles. And part of that's tied to a portion of the brain that's called the reticular activator, which is when you plant a seed, a thought, or you see something, the subconscious brain tries to make sense of it. And the easiest way to describe the reticular activator, and it's used a lot, is that you decide you want a Jeep. Let's say all of a sudden you want a CJ, whatever. I'm not even sure what they're called, a Wrangler. And next thing you know, you're driving around and all you see is Wranglers or the new Tesla truck, which I don't know if people are fans of it or not, but I think it looks kind of hideous, just me. But now that I've seen people posting them, I've seen 3 in the last week. Now, granted, they're selling them and there are more of them, but I promise you, if one popped up, I'm going to see it. And that's your subconscious brain connecting the dots, making sure that you see it. So part of the framework of crafting a better life is reframing again how you see things and then asking questions of your subconscious brain that it later figures out. And again, some questions take time if they're big questions. But if you ask the same question with repetitive energy, the universe wants to give you the answer. I'm convinced we're all capable. We're all humans with this energy that's either you're attracting something. And so the other half of this conversation is what energy do you have that's attracting like kind that puts you in a better place with your tribe and the people in your world and the way you see things and the way you absorb things. And so that subconscious brain piece, and here's another example. I don't know, scary movies don't bother everybody, but I know they're fake. I know they're not real, but I jump every time. I'm uneasy for a while after watching, some paranormal movie, and I dream about it. And your brain's working overtime trying to discern reality from made up,
Yep.
and it doesn't really know the difference. So back to the positive negative question, if you pose positive questions around your future and you use affirmations like, if it's to be, why not me? Or, hey, that felt negative. So what? Now what? Now it's created an opportunity. There's either time, space, or resource opportunity or some margin that I didn't have because of what appears to be failure could be a lesson or an opportunity. And it kind of lends itself to that silver linings mentality. And if, I find people that don't have the ability to rescript negative experiences into some positive lesson or opportunity tend to live in that space longer than they need to.
Yep.
And that eliminates the opportunity for better.
And first of all, I think that ties to how you frame things. The earlier discussion in time helps you frame things, but also then it sets up how do we. So you talked earlier about annual goals, daily goals, and then you have a very specific framework in the book, the goal and intention worksheet. And I think asking yourself the right questions helps
Yeah.
you frame up your goals or your vision, the longer term. But then how do we translate that to the shorter term? How do we get from vision or goal to what am I going to do today?
Well, it has to do with one. I think you start. So GPS is something I talk about in the book too. GPS, global positioning. Everybody uses it these days anyway, either Waze or Google Maps. And you know, what I know about life that's the overlay for this example is that if you don't know where you are, and just like in GPS, it can't figure out how to get you where you want to go. It needs 2 coordinates. And so part of life is just taking an honest assessment. And I say honest, but I also mean loving. Like, hey, part of the reason I included an entire chapter about my childhood is to say, hey, where you come from is not where you're going. And it doesn't define you unless you choose to. And then if you do let it define you, let it be the silver linings and the positivity that came from those experiences, or as simple as the perspective of a negative experience gives that allows you to help someone else again one day because you are now relatable. If you've suffered and had trauma and challenge, congratulations. That makes you a better human being capable of loving more and giving more because your perspective aligns with someone that probably needs your voicing that's now valid. And so again, that's an example of a reframe. But if you can clarify where you are in each category
Yep.
and then you define one thing better and you put it in your day planner, that's where this filters down into daily. You'll be amazed how in 30 days you'll wake up feeling like a different person. It's little things stacked. And the whole 5-year perspective allows you to sort of let the universe favor you and bring different experiences and people, and the reticular activator is what makes it real. And
Yeah.
so when I teach this workshop, I have a 5-year future self workshop. You walk out with a life-size poster really depicting all 12 categories and what awesome is in each category. And so you put that on the wall and you look at that every day. But then you can't neglect the daily grind and the things that have to
Yeah.
happen for you to, to 10x or elevate your game. You can't just sit around and stare at a poster board and expect life to be different. But those are the subconscious seeds you're planting or
Yes.
fertilizing that over time you'll run into things and go, I'm supposed to know you. All of a sudden it connects the dots. The reticular activator lights up. And, I believe in something Jack Canfield said. I read the book Success Principles, one of the best books written, in my opinion, for holistic success. Jack Canfield. He also wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul. And there's 66 chapters in that book. And I remember picking it up going, this is about the biggest book a realtor's ever read, because I'm not a big book reader. I like little in and out. Let's go sprints. But because of 66 chapters, I knocked it down in a day and a half at the beach, on a
Oh, wow.
vacation. One of the chapters is called The Inverse Paranoid Theory. And the theory is that the world is actually favors you and conspiring to your advantage. And it's another thing that if you adopt the mental attitude and the fortitude to overcome and to look past, little things stop being, the little negative things that are distractions. You just run right past them, and they don't hold on to you, and they don't keep you, sort of anchored, if you will.
And I,
You did say one other thing though,
yeah.
inhibitors, not inhibitors, but what's the purpose behind it, or I just lost my word. Intention, that's the
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I've set goals before, and sometimes you achieve that goal. Like buying a Porsche was a big first goal of mine in life. I knew that would do. Hey, I can just, and I didn't want to say like, well, I'll feel successful, but there's a reason I wanted this particular car, other than it's a cool car and I like it. After having it 6 months, I kind of went out and looked at it and went, that's the most impractical car on the planet. I have two young children who hate riding in the back seat because they can't see over the top of the gunnel, if you will.
Yep.
And I sold it. So what I had to get clear on is, why was that goal important? Because if you're not clear on the intention behind the goal, you may chase goals that become irrelevant. And that's a sad day, is when you invest a few years of your life and energy, and you're distracted for some other things that may or may not be equally or more important because you're hyper focused on one thing. Just be sure the one thing is the one thing.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, the earlier part of the conversation talked about the daily task, but that we're not saying ignore the long term. We're saying create and you have the 5-year future self, annual goals. Well, but the most important part is, just by doing the longer term planning, you're activating your brain and the reticular activator to know what you want in your mind. And the more you spend on that, the more clear you are and the more defined it is what you want, which guides your daily actions, is how I take that. Is that the long term gets you the clarity to what I should be doing today for fulfillment, success, whatever it might be. In all in you showed it again, but the life wheel, and the life wheel can help you identify where you're doing well, but where are there gaps, which might mean there's an additional amount of focus to put in adventure or family or relationships or charity or whatever it might be.
Right. Because if it's not in your day planner, Phil, it doesn't exist. That's been my mantra for 30 years. And, I taught this lesson to my oldest son when he was probably 8 or 9 years old. On a Friday, I pick him up from school. He's like, hey, Dad, tomorrow's the big fair at the school. And nobody had told me. I had no idea. And I had 3 appointments in my day planner already scripted. I was selling houses, and Saturday's a big work day. And I had to give him the bad news that I was committed to something else. And he teared up, and I said, if it's not in my day planner, it doesn't exist. And he looked at me really sadly, and I said, but here's the good news. You're a priority and the most important thing in my life. And I adore you, and I want to be there for you. You just have to script it into my day planner. You're welcome to open my day planner any day of the week and write as many appointments as you want with me. And they will be absolute sacred ground, non-negotiable, your time. And so it was a cool lesson for him, but it was also a cool mirrored moment to remind myself that your day planner is your sacred path to whatever it is you're after. And if you leave it to chance, you're probably not going to land there. And the benefit of the wheel is that when I, first share that at the beginning of the onset of a workshop, I'm like, here's the thing. It doesn't matter if it's a 1, a 2, a 5, or a 10. There's always one better. And can you describe what one activity moves the needle one number better? And the aha I feel is always the same. It actually doesn't take that much effort. it just takes a tremendous amount of intentionality, and you have to create sacred space in your plan so that it doesn't get forgotten or left behind, which is the root of regret.
I love that. So I want to, first of all, it's an area that I'm thinking about and I want to get more disciplined around. So I appreciate this is helpful to me. I want to shift a little bit and talk about how all of this applies to, you had referenced it, just the level of success you've had in real estate sales, in addition, a lot of different real estate investments, whatever it might be. But, you went from some point being in sales to offices and scaling and we're on a podcast here and you're in a really quiet place and on the top of a mountain with probably a lot of people, a lot of sales happening as we speak. I'd say what helped you structure your business and scale it and allow you to have the time and focus and freedom?
Yeah, well, it was a long journey. So, and it was a grind. Most people, back to the microwave mentality of wanting to wake up tomorrow rich or wake up tomorrow with mounds of success in whatever category on the wheel that you're looking for. Success is a lot like failure in that it's slow and then it's sudden. I think it was Mark Twain in a book that he wrote, The Sun Rises, that said he had a character that went bankrupt. And when asked how it happened, because he was the wealthiest guy in town, he said, slowly, then suddenly. And the problem with success is that it's so slow that people often quit or they micro quit daily where they don't pay attention to little things that become big things stacked together. And they end up in a position where they just don't feel good. They don't feel purposeful in their journey. So a lot of this has to do with crafting the perfect day. And the only way to do that is to get clear about where you are in the point one of GPS and where you're going as point two. And the 5-year vision, I think, just creates more space or sacred space for organic opportunity to show up in the right people. And I debated whether to include the chapter on networking. There's a whole chapter just on connecting with people. And when often asked, you hear this thing, imposter syndrome come up where successful people feel like they're undeserving. And I kind of chuckle at that theory. There are days where humility sets in and I feel weird. I happen to own a Porsche right now. And I feel, sometimes I roll up to a friend's place or I don't want to be that guy who thinks he's something because I know I'm not. It's just a piece of metal with some, it's not permanent. But at the same time, I think when you give credit to other people and you recognize big dreams don't become big on your own. No one succeeds alone, I think is something we've all said. But if you're not good at attracting and that's not your skill and you're not, I think there's room to grow for all of us. But there's a whole chapter on networking and connecting with people. And instead of working so hard to be interesting, try to be interested and spend more time asking better questions. And people will love you naturally more and appreciate you more. But when you said, how do you do it? One, I realized my DNA was to coach, train, and consult and build things. Like I'm a builder. And because, I get ADD, I said earlier, I still have some degree of that where I bounce around. My brain's just like ping pong balls inside my head sometimes. And instead of assigning that as a negative attribute, I've assigned it a positive attribute, and it allows me to juggle better and not get hung up on one ball that's bounced left or right when it should have gone straight. I also, back to the networking piece, nothing I've ever done was done without amazing people on my left and right. And so the imposter syndrome thing it makes me laugh only because it's a story you made up. Why wouldn't you be deserving of the fruits of labor and the things that you do when you ground it out and you did the right things for the right reasons and you got a result? And then when you're honest enough to look left and right and give full credit to the people that put you there or helped you get there, how could you be an imposter? You're just serving the community. You're helping your tribe. You're building other people's perspective around holistic happiness, success. And even, for most people, the job is responsible for the fiscal side and that too.
Yeah.
So I had this vision because I knew I wanted to lead people that led me down the franchise path. And Keller Williams, I was part of the first investment team in Atlanta. Just blessed. That inverse paranoid theory played out, and the world was conspiring to my advantage. I got a call late night that said, "Hey, would you like to put some money into a new venture?" And it was an unknown. They weren't anywhere near Atlanta, and it was Keller Who. I'd say, "Hey, I'm with Keller Williams," and the response for 2 straight years, Phil, was Keller Who. And so I'm not pitching brands. It's just the brand I hitched up to. And because we were so new, there were opportunities. And people often say, well, you got opportunities before it was over, developed, and now there's not. My advice is if the pond you're fishing isn't fertile, move your canoe to a new pond. Like there's opportunity everywhere, every day, every minute. Is your
All over the
reticular
place.
activator up? And are you networking with the right people so that those opportunities show up? And that's a people puzzle. And then it's a bring value puzzle because, if you don't come from contribution, no one's going to stick around long enough to help you if you don't help them first. And it's kind of a Zig Ziglarism, help enough people achieve their goals and your goals will always be met.
Man, I got so much here. So first of all, you were talking about just so you have in the book page 50 for Thomas Edison, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Another thing is just knowing like it you talked about yourself and knowing yourself and you can be a ping pong ball, but knowing yourself and your own strengths and then surrounding yourself with people that can supplement or do the other things that maybe you're not strong at, I think is what you were saying. I've said this before, but I'm just going to really challenge myself and the listeners. Like the value of your network, I think it is so underestimated or just undervalued. And I think everyone needs to take a very serious look at who you're surrounding yourself with on a daily basis. Are they giving you energy? Are they taking it away? Are they creating good habits in you? Are they creating bad habits in you?
Yeah.
And this is I think this is you talked about it from a business context. This is the whole life wheel in my opinion. if
Yeah.
you're if you're spending time with people of faith at church, for example, your reticular activate is going to elevate and that's what your mind is going to be on. So if you want to go in that direction, then hang out with people that are in that direction. I just think it's so undervalued and I think it's a challenge for myself and everyone to really take a serious look at that
Yeah.
and who's in my network that is moving me in the direction I want and not.
Well, and I've never made a really good decision and conversely, a really bad decision without someone by my side supporting that decision, a co-conspirator. And so I think if you take a hard look inside and you realize you're not going to outrun the people that you spend time with easily, it's like an anchor. And so I'm not saying get rid of dysfunctional friends, but if you truly are the average of the 3 to 5 people in each
Yeah.
category that you spend time with, you're going to organically rise or fall based on that median energy that group's going to bring. And you can tip the scales. Like I said, don't ditch your dysfunctional friends. They make you feel really successful and feel better about certain things sometimes. But if you live in that space, it's hard to wash that off and shake negative energy that's not helping you go and grow.
And I think being aware of that because then have an impact on them, elevate them, right? I mean, surround yourself around people that are going to elevate you, but also make it a point being aware of who you're around. I think you can observe maybe the traits you don't want, but then you can challenge those things in your friends to elevate or friends or whoever it is, business, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
building your awareness of your network. You talked about self-awareness. I think that's important in all aspects, but building your awareness of your network is probably the first step, and then
Yeah.
decide where to go from there.
Yeah, there's an easy way to do this too. Pull out a sheet of paper and list all of the people in each category that you've invested time with or that you see regularly. And just write, are they positive, neutral, or negative? And I don't mean that, like, don't write them off again as a human being. Everyone deserves love and friendship, but don't spend all of your time if it's a negative. There's kind of this lifters versus leaners conversation. Are they lifting you and are they challenging you in positive ways? Or are they leaning and they're constantly depleting your, resources across the board? It could just energy and emotion, just vampires, energy vampires. And again, don't just choose your time and invest with the right people. And you'll be amazed how the psychology of who you are, because we're all mirrors. It'll make all the difference in the world.
I love it. Rick,
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. If you just step back and really reflect, really think about your career, the process of writing the book, childhood, whatever it is, how does what you have done and what you're doing, how does it make you feel?
Surreal, to be honest. In fairness, realize because of the 5-year Future Self workshop that I created. And by the way, that process was created inside of a model at Keller that was for hiring people. And if you want to retain better people, if you want to attract better people, ask better questions there as well, and take a real authentic, transparent approach to connecting and communicating and helping people. And so this was just a process baked into the hiring strategy where you figure out their life journey, their current state, and where they want to be. And it wasn't as detailed and it didn't have 12 spokes, but I evolved inside of that ecosystem. And if you're aligned with someone's holistic goals, they're probably not leaving. And so I was also plagued by the statement, Phil, that people quit people, not companies. And so as a company owner, it really, every time I'd lose somebody that I felt had quality attributes and potential, I took a hard look at myself and less about what they did or didn't do. And how could I have been more purposeful and more impactful? And so when you say, how do I feel? Honestly, I still feel incomplete, not because I haven't done enough to feel accomplished, because by outside standards, I feel like the world probably honors the check boxes I've ticked. But at the end of the day, it's not what you have and what you've done, it's what you're capable of doing. And if you look down at the 12 categories and you feel this burning opportunity or issue or challenge with how you feel about your performance, that's just an indicator. That's just a trigger. That's an opportunity to take a deep breath and reprioritize. And so when I say incomplete, that doesn't mean I haven't fulfilled my mission to date, but I have a lot left.
You're not
And so
done.
my prayer was always, it's an Andy Stanley prayer from North Point Church. God, give me the wisdom and then the courage to act on it. And I think every human being listening on this podcast and beyond has infinite wisdom. We just deny default and distract ourselves with chaos, not to have to lean into the wisdom of who we are, what we are, and where we're going. And it comes back to that whole, what's the intention behind goals and what's the impact you want on people and your personal experience. And so am I complete and done? Nope. Am I absolutely grateful to the core? 1000%. Like I live
And
this Pied Piper life today where I don't have to go to work. But my prayer, remember, was wisdom and courage. About 3.5 years ago, I woke up and went, I don't want to do the same thing. I don't want to be on this cycle of repetitive energy where every year it's the same goal setting, same tick, same. And so inside the ecosystem of the franchise companies that I owned, I found myself less fulfilled. And my prayer was answered in that it's funny, you don't make deals with spiritual, I don't think, with God. But in this case, I said, you can laugh because it is humorous how we're humans thinking we're in control of everything. And sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. But I remember saying, man, if ever I'm shown the ability to back out of my day job so that I create margin and time, I will make myself available to anyone that asks for help. And that was really this overarching energy in my body that led me to realizing, hey, I can replace myself in the franchise world, extricate. And it took a lot for me to put that ego piece on a shelf and to own that, hey, that was just a past me. Like I was the CEO of that, but that's not who I am. That's what I did. And now who I am is the product of this conversation we're having today. So, and
well,
I
I
have margin and time to be having do what I want because I recognize the power of passive income and building businesses. And that's why we're here.
well, I think incomplete sounds, especially when I look at what you've done, maybe it sounds harsh, but the way you said it and explained it, I think makes a lot of sense. And what I will just say is the amount of impact you've had to this point is unbelievable, and congratulations.
Thank
The
you.
amount, the amount of desire to have an impact. And if I think about your growth and exponential growth in the space you've created probably in the last 3 years to grow more, to have a bigger impact over the next 5, 10, 20 years, it's exciting for me and I'm excited to watch it because
Thanks.
just you've had such an impact on your business and Keller Williams and so many people and with the book now, but to imagine how that's going to grow and expand in the future is really cool to see. So I want to
Thanks.
ask you,
By the way, I'm excited and I'm terrified. And so those that are listening, if you look down at your, the 5-year version of you in each category and it scares the heck out of you, it's probably something to really consider because it really matters.
yeah,
Trivial success is irrelevant and you forget about it the second you've checked, you've accomplished it. Big success and big impact, that's got a lasting power that's undeniable. So lean into that better version. And if it's scary, find role models and resources and coaches and really explore it. So thank you for putting me there. That's important.
I love it. And I think you're probably also getting better at creating that 5 year scary vision and the confidence that you've done this in the past, you've figured it out in the past. Therefore, even though it's still scary, you have the confidence that you'll figure it out, and you'll connect with the right people. You'll just things will fall into place because the reticular activator is in place and active. And look, you're just a smart, well thought out guy that's going to figure it out.
Well, and I think we all have that same capacity. And, so what? Now what? I try to think of the worst thing that can happen, and it's usually humorous. And then from there, I lean in and swing anyway. It's like Ben Franklin had a great quote that said, when asked how he did what he did, and if you go back and you study history, Ben Franklin was borderline genius, with an inventor, statesman, politician, writer, brilliant thought leader. He said, I bit off more than I can chew, and then I chewed like hell. And I kind of, again, another seed planted, another, belief I have in myself. I'm just going to chew like hell so that I don't choke out. And it just keeps proving itself. I prove myself right. And it helps, by the way, when you have energy bigger than you in your heart and you feel like
Yeah.
I'm a part of a journey, that I have control of certain things, but there's a bigger destiny. And without taking chances, you'll never know. And that's the greatest regret on the planet, is never knowing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So much good stuff here. I just want to keep going, Rick. But a couple of closing questions. So, you talk a lot about different success in different areas of life and business, but also the whole wheel. I love it. But like, if there's a key factor to your success in the past and moving forward, what was it? What will it be?
So one, I've alluded to it earlier. It's my network. I have some amazing people in my world that challenge me when it's appropriate, and they also set the tone for what is possible. Again, back to the subconscious brain. If you can't see it in someone else and then recognize your capacity to do what they do to get what they get, you're probably stuck. And that's step one. Is you have to. There's two voices. There's the inside voice and the outside voice. And, people define integrity as doing what you say, or saying what, do what you say you'll do and do it. And I think integrity on another level is when your inside voice about your greatness aligns with your outside behavior. And that's a difficult chasm to span sometimes. And I think the reason is you don't have enough positive role models. That I don't think you want it to look easy, but you do want it to look possible and even probable if you apply yourself the way they've applied themselves. And back to your point earlier, recognizing we're not good at everything. Who do I need in my camp that aligns with me, that offsets my weaknesses, so that that no longer becomes a weakness, that I spend time in my strength zone or my core genius, so that what I do, it's not easy, but it comes more naturally. You're not swimming uphill and climbing, in the wrong direction.
Wow. Um, I want to ask you, so you mentioned a book earlier, but most impactful, let's say business and real estate book. And then I'm going to come and ask you about a personal development book.
So I would say the MREA book changed my life. It was Gary Keller's book. And the good thing is, I love Gary Keller for all that he does for our industry. He fights for the agent, not necessarily as an owner. It was weird because early in my career, I was an investor, a silent or passive investor, and I was just a top agent in the country, and built this pretty cool little real estate team that was crushing it, seven figures. And so I was invited to these masterminds, and just mind blowing. And those masterminds led to him crafting a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. And the cool thing about that is I've used that book to consult chiropractors, anyone with a business where people is your target audience. And I don't know many businesses where people aren't your target, but there's the four key business models, the people model, the lead generation, the budget, and then operations. And so if you can tactically break your business into bite-sized pieces, and you make it, and you put it into your day planner, and then you craft it around the right people and the right economics and the right lead gen, it's hard to fail. And then it becomes a scalable experience because you can leverage other people's activities and energy. And that's the construct for owning a business. At some point, you replace yourself, and I remember him asking the question, do you own a business, or are you a salesman? And at the time I thought, well, I own a business. And he said, well, what happens when you leave for 6 months? And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's not a business. It's not going to, I'm kind of the epicenter of all things on my team back in the day. But again, another seed planted and fertilized. Later on, I realized, hey, I need the right people who are as good or better than me, so I don't have this issue with, letting things go and delegating. And all of a sudden, running a business becomes fun because you're challenged in positive ways by the people around you.
Yep.
So that was the book, is the MREA, the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. It's 20 years old. It's as applicable today as it ever was, and it's an operations manual, not a novel.
Yep. And I think it's really relevant to not just real estate or not just agents, just for people in general. The other thing I want to say is that people want to talk about or do talk about real estate investing as passive and you don't own a business. But what I would say is real estate investing can either be very active or very passive, as
Mhm.
can owning a real estate agency, as can owning any business. It can be as active or passive. Define what you want it to be and start working towards that. If you want to own a very passive business, build the business that is passive.
Right.
It doesn't like real estate isn't the only thing that can be passive. Real estate, it can be very active, and business can be very passive if structured and set up correctly.
Yeah. And does the pain justify the reward? And are you doing things that, like, if you truly enjoy it, you've heard this before. If you're doing things you're good at and that you love, you never have a day of work in your life. And
Right.
so I'm not saying there are things you have to do as part of that experience. If you're especially leading an organization, there's going to be liability and compliance and accounting and things that you go, bleh. But if the right people are watching those dials and you understand the mechanics of what winning looks like, it's easier to craft a winning formula.
And the other reframe I have to think about is when you for your business, for the people that work for you, for your the partners, whatever it is, if you construct that business so you are doing things that you don't like, that is not the best thing for the business. If you are setting that business up so you're doing the pieces and parts of it that are growing it and you really like make you excited, that is
Right.
going to be way more impactful to everybody else in the organization than if you're doing what you don't like. So I don't like the to me I've had this limiting belief where, well, if I'm not doing those things and I'm just delegating them, that's selfish of me almost, right?
Mhm.
So I just think reframing it and designing it and knowing that when you're doing that, you're helping all your employees and your business partners and other folks.
Yeah, and there's a key thing here, Phil. Inside of each role and inside of each responsibility for your business, whether it could just be your portfolio, there's going to be the 80-20 rule shows up where 20% of what you do and where you put your money creates 80% of the return.
Yep.
And so I wholeheartedly agree with stop doing things that don't resonate with your DNA. It's just an uphill battle and probably one that doesn't fulfill you. But inside of each of those categories or areas of importance, someone has to own the 20%, or you're going to have a loose lug nut and a wheel's going to fall off. And so it doesn't, if it's to be, why not me? But doesn't have to be me. There's
Right.
somebody out there that I'm stealing their job, their opportunity by doing it for them. Just because I can doesn't mean that I should, because it may not be inside of my 80-20, the 20% that moves the organization.
And there are
That's
people out there that are good at it and like to do that too. And
exactly.
I think
They
that's the
wake up
important.
hungry and they go
Yeah,
to bed fulfilled.
exactly. Exactly. What about personal development book, Rick?
The success principles really did kind of set the stage, and anything Zig Ziglar, because I kind of eat positivity for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I feel like back to that subconscious brain and eavesdropping, reticular activator. Whatever seeds you're planting are the ones that are going to grow into plants, and you either have to cut them down or you hug them because they're the right plant. I also like Hal Elrod's book, by the way,
Oh yeah.
the what is it?
Miracle Morning.
Miracle Morning for realtors, but he has
Yep.
one for just about every vocation. And I love his SAVERS acronym. And
Yeah.
I try to do this as often as I can. And in full transparency, I did get up this morning and cold plunge hot tub is part of my ritual. And but I like that, it's silence. The SAVERS acronym is silence, affirmation, visualizations, exercise, reading, and scribing.
Yeah.
So writing a journal. Man, if you can do that even 3 times, 4 times a week, you'll have more clarity than you've ever dreamed possible. And now you've got something to sink your teeth into to find people to role model towards that best version.
That is a great book. I read it several years ago, and that for me is imperfect for sure, and it's evolved and changed. But let that be the case. Let it evolve and change so it works for you. Figure out which part of the SAVERS acronym works well for you, and which maybe there's pieces that don't resonate as much. But try it and build your self awareness as to what works for you. So, Rick, um, just kind of in closing, I want to what are you excited about moving forward? And I want to make sure how can people find out more about you and the book?
Well, thanks for asking. It's really, again, as I said earlier, I've created this margin. And one thing I didn't say, Phil, is that I think counterbalance is the most important thing on earth, because you can get heavy chasing something that you forget, again, the other things on the dial. And so in the world of even hyper production and hyper performance, make sure you create sacred space for quiet time and thinking and connecting with nature and the people that matter. Because I've learned early on, don't make assumptions about where people are if you're not asking the right questions and are truly honoring them with presence. And so as I get older, I also create sacred space not to have to stress out or do things, just because I've decided like I'm going to do that, just sacred space. I'm excited about sharing the message. And it's funny in that I was asked early on, what's the avatar for my book or the person, the perfect read? I didn't write it with that in mind. I didn't have this target audience. I wanted to share my legacy letter to my great, great, great grandkids and my story so that they live on in perpetuity. And I'm hoping others adopt the spirit of, hey, we're all authors, man. You're writing a book, whether you want to or not. And whether you publish is almost irrelevant. But today's a page in your book. And it's either a page you keep because you're proud of it or a page you tear out and burn because you didn't pay attention to the things that mattered most. And you let the world tell you what to do versus what your heart and your spirit led you to do. So I'm excited because I'm in this heartfelt place where I'm kind of waiting for something to show up, but if you wait, nothing shows up. So I'm also networking with nonprofits and some churches. And I'm on a podcast, in fact, next week with a guy that has one of the bigger churches here in Atlanta, and I'm excited to share it. But I think the avatar is anyone who wants to evolve as a human being into their highest potential. And so we'll see where it goes, but teens are still where my heart is. So I'm actively involved in Camp Grace, which is a summer camp for inner city kids. And all of the money I make from the book goes to Camp Grace. Just listeners know it's cool to be able to do something because your heart says do it, not because there's an ROI that's on a spreadsheet. And I do realize, I know for a fact at the end of your life, you're going to either wish you had or be glad you did. And it's probably not going to be the spreadsheet you're clutching from your business. It's going to be the hearts, minds, experiences, the conversations, the relationships you built, and the ripple effect of adding positive energy and being a lifter.
Man, Rick. Well, I'll just close with, first of all, check out the book. Stop settling, finding clear direction for a regret-free life. We'll post this on social media. We'll put a link on it.
Thanks.
When I think of people that are just good, well-meaning, with a big heart that just want to have an impact, I think of you, Rick. This has been a phenomenal episode for me. I think our listeners are going to love it. And every one of our listeners is the avatar and needs to check out the book because it's fantastic. Rick, thank you so much. I'm very grateful for you coming on. By the way, twice, because last week I had internet connection issues and we couldn't connect. So we had a great 15-minute conversation last week and we had to reschedule. Rick has been so patient and graceful throughout. So I appreciate it so much, Rick.
So what now? What? We're here and this was meant to be. So yeah, awesome. It's also on Audible, just in case you're a listener and you prefer not to read physically. So find it on audible.com. So thanks for the kindness, Phil. Sure appreciate the conversation, man. You're genuinely awesome, dude. And grateful to have you in my life.
Rick, thanks so much for the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast. Signing off. Thank you for listening to the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful. If you know current or aspiring investors or entrepreneurs or anyone that would benefit from today's episode, we appreciate you sharing it with them, or better yet, providing us a 5-star review. To learn more about Muller Real Estate, visit our website at www.mullerre.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter or local events via our website. In closing, I encourage you to be purposeful in all areas of life, educate yourself, network with others that have been successful, take action, and lead. Thank you.